Hi everyone, this is Liz Stanton at Synapse, and we're going to get going now with our webinar on cutting electric bills with the Clean Power Plan. And we're all set to go. I'm going to start out with some logistics. So if you haven't been on one of our webinars before, here's how it works. We're going to be giving a presentation for about a half an hour, and after that answering questions from the audience. Everyone out there, all the participants are on mute and will remain on mute throughout the presentation and throughout the question period. If you have questions to ask that are substantive, they're about the presentation, please send them to webinar@synapse-energy.com. If instead you have a technical question, something's going wrong, you can't see the slides or you can't hear everybody's voices, then go ahead and use the chat feature that's part of WebEx, and we'll see if we can get that worked out for you. We also have these slides posted up on our website right now, along with the report and the fact sheet that we're talking about today. And we will be sending out the slides and other materials and also the audio recording of this presentation to all the participants sometime later today or tomorrow. So for those of you that don't know us, we're Synapse Energy Economics. We're based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where we're having a beautiful sunny day. And we do a lot of work for advocates, environmental advocates, consumer advocates, government agencies in the energy sector, some of that based in electric sector and sometimes in other things, natural gas and so on. I have with me today Pat Knight, who is going to be giving the presentation and is the lead author of the work that we're discussing. I'm going to act as the moderator. I'll be reading your questions on that webinar at synapse-energy.com email and passing them along to Pat when he comes to the end of his presentation. So thank you, Pat.
Great. So thanks Liz, for that introduction. So as Liz said, today we're going to be talking about using the Clean Power Plan to cut electric bills. And today we'll be looking at an analysis which is an update to analysis that we completed back in January. And we did a couple of webinars and reports and fact sheets on that, which are all available on our website right now. This particular re-release that we'll be talking about today has been updated since the last version to reflect the most up-to-date information on energy efficiency resource standards. We've also made one change to our low EE CPP scenario to be more in line with what EPA's modeling expectations are for future energy efficiency, and I'll be talking a lot more about that in just a couple of minutes. But before we get to the analysis itself, we thought it would be a good idea to touch a little on recent developments in legal decisions affecting the Clean Power Plan, most importantly, the recent Supreme Court stay. But we'll also be talking a little bit about the Supreme Court's decision on Order 745, which also happened back in January. At the end of this talk, before we get to questions, we'll be presenting some very, very recent data that's just been released from the Energy Information Administration, the EIA, just a week or two ago, talking about what happened in 2015 in terms of electricity trends and what this means in terms of momentum towards a clean energy future. So let's dive right into this stay. So as many of you heard, no doubt, on Tuesday, February 9th in 2016, the Supreme Court issued a stay on EPA's Clean Power Plan. And what this stay means is that implementation is paused. And it's paused until the Clean Power Plan comes before the Supreme Court and they make a decision about it. And because it's been paused, it means that it's unlikely a decision will be reached before 2017 or 2018. So this is just the implementation. Because the implementation is paused, so too it's likely that the compliance dates will also be paused or pushed back. That said, at least 20 states out there are still continuing to develop their plans and are planning to pursue a clean energy future with or without the Clean Power Plan. So over here on this side of the screen, we've got a little chart depicting a timeline of the stay. So some important things to note is even though the Supreme Court issued this stay, the case is actually still being decided before the lower D.C. Circuit. And we expect right now for the D.C. Circuit to begin hearing the case right at the beginning of June. And we're thinking, based on best estimates, that they will issue a decision in fall, so September or October. Probably regardless of how the decision shapes out, the case will then be appealed. And there's a chance that it could be appealed directly to the Supreme Court, but there's also a chance that it could get appealed to an en banc hearing, which means a larger panel of judges within the D.C. Circuit. So basically what all this means is what I was just saying, is that there's likely going to be some time until it gets before the Supreme Court and they make their decision on it, and Clean Power Plan planning can continue for good or not. So I think what's important to remember here within the context of all of this is the focus on these states down below. Even though the Clean Power Plan is kind of on pause right now, there's still a lot of developments and a lot of work being done on moving along towards a cleaner energy future. Another recent legal development is the Supreme Court's decision on Furc Order 745. Now, this is a little bit more of an esoteric topic, but it's also really important for energy efficiency within the Clean Power Plan. So in mid-January, the Supreme Court upheld Furc's Order 745, which was being challenged because opponents of the order were reluctant to allow demand response and energy efficiency, by extension, to continue to participate in wholesale electricity markets. And the court's ruling explicitly allows demand response to continue participation. And what this means is that basically a funding source is protected for energy efficiency. Energy efficiency and other more active demand response measures can be involved in capacity markets and other wholesale electricity markets, which preserves a valuable funding source for these resources and helps to make sure that they're playing on the same playing field as supply-side resources like coal and gas. So those are the recent developments. Next, I'll be talking a little bit about an overview of our analysis, including key findings and methodology. After that, I'll be diving a little bit into state-specific results. And finally, I'll be talking about the recent developments that I alluded to in terms of the electricity trends in the past recent years, which show the momentum towards a clean energy future. So our analysis, what do we do? In this analysis, we looked at Clean Power Plan compliance in the 48 contiguous states. We modeled 3 separate scenarios. The first, a no CPP base case scenario, which is kind of a reference case or business as usual, modeling a future in which there is no Clean Power Plan. The next is a Clean Power Plan compliant Synapse CPP scenario, which features compliance being achieved through the use of strong energy efficiency measures. We also modeled a third scenario, and this is the one that I discussed that we've changed a little bit since the last time we did this webinar. And this scenario is the low EE CPP scenario. This scenario is also compliant with the Clean Power Plan, but features lower levels of energy efficiency and instead relies more heavily on natural gas and renewables to achieve compliance. In each scenario, we examine the impacts of the Clean Power Plan, or not, on household electric bills. And we paid special attention to the relationship between bill savings and current state-level energy efficiency standards, state-specific emission reductions, and poverty rates. So here's our first key finding. We found that without the Clean Power Plan, households can expect to pay an average of $17 per month more on their electric bills in the year 2030. What we've got here is a chart showing the 2030 monthly bill increases without the Clean Power Plan for each one of the states that we modeled. And you can see that depending on which state you're in, individual ratepayers in each state could see savings of $2 to $45. This side focuses on what people can achieve in a month in the year 2030. But what's really interesting is when you turn it into a slide that looks at total savings over 2020 through 2030. And we find that over this time period, higher electric bills without the Clean Power Plan could cost customers $79 billion. And what that translates into individual ratepayers is that if the Clean Power Plan is not implemented, typical households in the United States can expect to lose over $1,400 between 2020 and 2030 without the Clean Power Plan. And also interesting is that average households in the 27 states that are currently suing EPA actually stand to lose a little bit more, $1,500 without the Clean Power Plan. So we conducted our analysis using our Synapse Clean Power Plan Toolkit. Excuse me. This toolkit brings together inputs from a number of different models, including Cavity, which projects future costs of environmental retrofits for coal units, and the Energy Efficiency Savings Tool, which we use to estimate future levels of energy efficiency savings and the costs associated with those. We take outputs from these two models and put them into REEDS. And REEDS is a dispatch model created by the National Renewable Energy Lab and has been heavily customized by Synapse and is used to get a really accurate look at how the dynamic electric system can change in the future depending on the inputs you put into it. We take a bunch of information from Cavity and the Energy Efficiency Savings Tool and combine it with forecasts for natural gas prices, what we know about what has already been announced in terms of unit retirements and unit additions, and get outputs from that tool and bring it into our report and CP3T models. And in those models, we can evaluate scenarios for Clean Power Plan compliance and understand what they mean in terms of customer bills. Speaking of scenarios, we looked at 3 different ones in this analysis, as I was saying before. The first is the no CPP scenario. This is a business-as-usual reference case in which there is no Clean Power Plan. The second is a Synapse CPP scenario, which is Clean Power Plan compliant, uses the mass-based existing and new targets set by the EPA, and complies with the Clean Power Plan through strong investment in energy efficiency. The last scenario we're going to talk about today is the low EE CPP scenario, which is also Clean Power Plan compliant, also uses the same mass-based target, and complies with the Clean Power Plan by using moderate levels of energy efficiency, increased levels of natural gas generation, and renewables. What's important is that in all of these scenarios, we're making the same assumptions about growth in electric demand, apart from energy efficiency, same assumptions about natural gas prices on the books, so known retirements and unit additions, and known state requirements for efficiency and renewables. In our analysis, we modeled 2 different trading regions. Now, even before the state came into effect, there was a lot of uncertainty out there about what states were going to do in terms of trading, whether states are going to segregate themselves into single state sort of trading pools, or whether they were going to be nationwide trading pools, or whether there might be sort of smaller regional pools. We looked at 2 different pools. We looked at one pool in which the 9 states in the Northeast that are involved in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, those 9 states trade among themselves, and that the other 39 states in the contiguous U.S. trade with each other for Clean Power Plan allowances. As I said, we made a couple of recent updates to this analysis since the last time we talked about it. The first are changes to, it says here the no CPP scenario, but it's really all the scenarios we're looking at, where we've updated them all with current information on energy efficiency resource standards. Now, when we're talking about energy efficiency resource standards in this analysis, what we're talking about are regulations that require future reductions to annual retail sales. There's a lot of other standards out there that are either voluntary, apply to years that are now in the past, or require reductions in peak demand rather than annual demand. And these are not standards that we're modeling explicitly in this analysis. We're interested in standards that require energy efficiency savings in terms of annual sales in the future. As I said, we also changed the low EECPP scenario to have moderate levels of energy efficiency. And what this means is that all states that do not have existing efficiency standards meet at least minimums of 1% annual incremental energy savings by the year 2025. Here's a chart showing what that means for energy efficiency levels. We've got the no CPP energy efficiency on the bottom, followed by low EECPP, followed by the Synapse CPP on the top. And the way you can think about this is The low EECPP has about twice as much energy efficiency by the year 2030 compared to the base case, whereas the Synapse CPP has about 4 times as much energy efficiency by the time you get to the year 2030. Here's how this shapes out in terms of generation. This is a chart showing generation by resource type for a number of different years for a number of different resources. So according to the different colors, we've got energy or energy efficiency savings coming from energy efficiency, renewables, natural gas combined cycle units, coal, other, which is kind of so small you can't even see it, and nuclear generation. We've got it for 2012, which is kind of a reference point historical year, and for each year in the future, or rather three interesting years in the future, 2020, 2025, and 2030. And each one of these bars represents one of these scenarios that we're looking at. So we've got the no CPP, Synapse CPP, and low EECPP scenario. So let's focus in on what's happening over here in 2030. This Synapse CPP case is kind of the main one that we'll be talking about, which features Clean Power Plan compliance through the use of strong energy efficiency. And true to its name, you're seeing a large amount of energy efficiency in this future year. Meanwhile, the low EECPP scenario mainly complies through the use of some energy efficiency, but also renewables and slightly expanded natural gas. What's important to note here is that the 2 CPP compliance scenarios do feature less coal and natural gas combined than is present in the reference case in the year 2030. So while I've been talking about energy efficiency, I figured I'd pause here just for a minute to talk a little bit more about what energy efficiency means within the Clean Power Plan. And if you've tuned into previous webinars of ours, you'll have heard this before, but I think it really stands, it's really important to emphasize the importance of this, that energy efficiency has a critical role in the Clean Power Plan. There's a bit of confusion out there, I'd say, about how energy efficiency can participate, whether it can participate in the Clean Power Plan, and it's largely our opinion that this might have something to do with the fact that energy efficiency has been removed from target setting in the final rule, as opposed to it being in place in the proposed rule, but it can still definitely be used for compliance. First, in rate-based approaches, which we're actually not analyzing today at all, but in rate-based approaches, energy efficiency measures are given direct incentives. So they are given a credit for every megawatt hour that they save that they can then turn around and turn into revenue to either offset the cost of their programs or to fund yet more energy efficiency. In mass-based approaches, it's a little bit more complicated. So first, in any situation, energy efficiency is a cost-effective way to reduce demand for electricity. As I just showed in this last slide, the more energy efficiency you have, the less need there is for utility-side resources, which helps to reduce emissions and can help to avoid or defer other mass-based compliance options. The second way that energy efficiency can be used in mass-based approaches is by states taking action to develop their own customized plans. And this is kind of more important now than ever with this day. So states have a kind of default option for compliance handed to them by the EPA, but they're allowed to make changes to it. And as long as the EPA approves it, they can put these changes into effect. And some changes that they can make are to increase set-asides or to dedicate auction revenue directly to energy efficiency measures. And through these actions, states can create direct incentives for energy efficiency where they might not occur by default in the first place.
Pat, let me interrupt you for a second and just ask you a couple of questions about this slide and your discussion about energy efficiency and the Clean Power Plan. First, just to clarify, you're saying that while previously in the proposed Clean Power Plan, energy efficiency had been part of how EPA was setting the emission reduction targets. But now it's not part of that anymore. It's not thought of by EPA when they're setting the targets. So that's the distinction that you're making, that it's not part of setting the targets, but it can still be used to,
Yeah, that's right. So in the proposed rule, EPA put together, I'm going to say, 4 or 5 different, they call them building blocks, that could be used to reduce emission rates in the future. So you could do things like expand the use of natural gas. You could count new nuclear units, or the generation from them at least. You could build new renewables, and you could also build energy efficiency. There's a whole host of additional emission reduction options that EPA could have included in the proposed rule, but didn't. And what they've done in the final rule is they've removed the energy efficiency building block, but basically from the target setting, but changed the proportion of the other building blocks so that the final emission rate target is pretty much what it was in the original proposed rule. So again, EPA does not preclude energy efficiency from being a strategy that is used to achieve the compliance targets that it set. It just didn't use energy efficiency to make the targets in the first place.
And then it just might be helpful for some folks on the call to hear you talk through how is it that energy efficiency and renewables reduce generation from fossil fuel power plants and therefore reduce emissions, just to connect that circle for people.
Sure thing. So I'll talk a little bit about energy efficiency first. So the way energy efficiency works for folks who aren't familiar with it is that for every megawatt hour of energy efficiency that's put onto the electric grid, and that megawatt hour could come from things like I'm putting in new energy efficient light bulbs, or installing new, better refrigerators or dishwashers or things of that nature that reduce my energy consumption versus what it would have been in the in alternate case in which I hadn't done those things. And since my energy consumption is reduced, that means that there is less demand for electrons that come from coal or natural gas or other power plants, which decreases their generation and which leads to a decrease in emissions overall. Renewables is a little bit more straightforward. Instead of thinking about how your electricity gets avoided at your house, it's just what your electricity is coming from. If it's coming from renewables, those are clean, non-emitting sources that produce megawatt hours without an associated ton of carbon dioxide. And you can compare that to resources like gas or coal, which necessitate some amount of carbon dioxide for every megawatt hour that they produce.
So there's a finite amount of sales, and if we're getting it from renewables, then we're not getting it from fossil fuel.
That's right.
So, and just for folks that joined us a little bit late, if you have a question that you'd like for me to ask Pat, then please send that to our webinar at synapse-energy.com email, and I'll pass it along to him.
That's great. So that was a great place to take a break for a minute. What we're going to jump into next is the state-specific results from our analysis. So over the next couple of slides, we're going to be presenting two different kinds of comparisons. In the first couple of slides, we're going to be comparing bill savings between our no CPP scenario and our Synapse CPP scenario. If you remember, our Synapse CPP scenario is the one that complies with the CPP using strong amounts of energy efficiency, while the no CPP case is the reference case that has no clean power plan. So we're going to be highlighting 7 key findings from this study. The first finding we have here is that strong investment in energy efficiency can save ratepayers to the tune of an average of $17 per month versus a future in which there is no clean power plan. This is the same bar chart that I was showing you early on, where we've got bill savings on the y-axis between these two different cases, and the states along the x-axis ranked by the states that save the most versus the states that save the least. And what we're showing here isn't total bills. What we're showing is the difference between bills in these two different cases. Now, there are a lot of factors that affect the level of monthly bill savings that we're seeing here. And these factors, the main factors at least, are the energy efficiency requirements that are currently in place and the resources that end up being used to generate power in the future in the two different scenarios. For example, many of the states over here on the left side of the chart do not currently have forward-looking energy efficiency standards in place, at least as they've been defined for this analysis. In the no CPP case, this means that a lot of these states end up building a lot of natural gas or renewables in order to comply with the Clean Power Plan, and end up passing the cost of those new units along to consumers. But in the Synapse CPP case, because of the presence of strong energy efficiency, which did not exist in the no CPP case, this new construction is eliminated, and it eliminates the need for these costs. On the other hand, you've got states over here, many of which have strong energy efficiency standards currently in place, and will be seeing bill savings in the future, regardless of whether or not there is a clean power plan. Our second finding is that large emission reductions do not prevent states from saving on their bills. Here's a scatter plot showing the monthly bill savings and emission reductions for each state. And each state is represented as these red dots with the national average kind of in the middle here. So as you might recall me saying, there's the $17, and here's our national average at $17. Now, the x-axis in this chart shows the CO2 emission reductions from 2005 to 2030. So a lot of you might have heard the national emission reduction being framed in the press as in the Clean Power Plan as being 32% saving, or 32% emission reductions by 2030 over 2005 levels. And that's where you can sort of position this blue dot. Now, all of these other red dots are in slightly different places. And this is kind of due to two factors. And when I'm talking about different places, I'm talking about in terms of their spread from 0 to 100. Under the Clean Power Plan target, states are actually assigned different targets. So not everyone has the same target. It just ends up that every state, when taken together, results in national emission targets of 32%. So these states kind of, by default, are going to be located across this x-axis in terms of their emission reduction. However, what we're also doing in this analysis is modeling emissions trading. So some states don't necessarily achieve compliance by reducing emissions in their own state. What they do is they buy allowances from other states that have achieved greater emission reductions than they are required to do. So again, thinking about this as a national plan and getting to a nationwide average of 32% emission reductions by 2030. Now, as to my point here about large emission reductions do not preclude bill savings, what we see is that of the 7 states with the highest bill savings from the Clean Power Plan, 6 reduced their CO2 emissions by more than 45% between the 2 years that we're talking about here. And that, although it says one of these states eliminates its emissions entirely, Vermont and Washington are both very close to achieving 100%, so you might even just think of that as 2 states. Our third finding is that large bill savings are commonly found in states with high poverty rates. This is the exact same chart that I was just showing 2 slides ago, except what I've done here is highlight the states that have higher than average poverty rates. And when I'm saying higher than average poverty rates, we're comparing the poverty rates in these states to the national average poverty rate. This chart shows that of the 8 states with the highest monthly bill savings, 5 states have poverty rates above the national rate. And 5 of these states, or 2 of the states in these 5 are Alabama and Kentucky, which have among the highest poverty rates in the nation. So what this means is that besides saving money across the board, cost-effective energy efficiency measures have significant implications for those who are most impoverished. And because energy expenditures can be such a significant portion of total spending in low-income households, energy efficiency measures are especially meaningful to those people who are spending such a large portion of their paycheck on energy expenditures already. Our fourth finding is that largest bill savings are found in states with no current energy efficiency requirements. And this is what I was just hinting at a couple of slides ago. What we've got is of the 24 states with the highest monthly bill savings, none of them, 0, have energy efficiency standards currently in place, again, as we've defined them for this analysis. Now, these standards are often really important because there are some reasons that energy efficiency won't get done kind of in a business as usual future. Many times, utility companies won't invest in energy efficiency measures. After all, they're in the business to sell kilowatt hours of electricity, and energy efficiency would cut into those revenues. Also, there are many barriers to consumers who would like to do energy efficiency being able to do so on their own. And those barriers include things like financing issues, things like lack of information, access to expertise, and things like difficulty in control of one's residence. For example, the classic renter or tenant owner problem that we can talk about more in the Q&A session if people have questions. So now let's move to a second type of comparison. So far we've been comparing electricity bills between the no CPP and Synapse CPP scenarios, but let's flip to the second two scenarios instead of the first two. Now we're going to be comparing electricity bills between the Synapse CPP scenario and the low EE CPP scenario. Again, as mentioned earlier, in both these scenarios, Clean Power Plan compliance is achieved, but the low EE CPP scenario uses moderate energy efficiency, increased NGCCs, and renewables to achieve compliance. So again, what we found is that energy efficiency is an incredibly cheap way to reduce CO2 emissions. In this scenario, we see that total system costs are 10% higher in the low EE CPP case compared to the Synapse CPP case, resulting in average household bills of $14 higher per month than if strong energy efficiency were pursued. Our sixth finding is that energy efficiency is still an especially cheap compliance strategy for high poverty states. Now, the trend in terms of the high poverty states being the ones that are sort of skewed most to the left side of this chart isn't quite as strong, but we're still seeing many states on the left-hand side of this chart achieving both high levels of bill savings and currently featuring very high poverty rates compared to the national average. Finally, what we still see in this set of scenario comparisons is that energy efficiency is extremely important in achieving low bills in terms of the current energy efficiency standards that are in place today. Of the 16 states with the highest monthly bill savings between these two scenarios, only one of these states currently has an ERS. And this is probably the biggest factor in determining the differences in bill savings across all of these states.
Pat, before you go on into the next section, let me just interrupt you. Can you go back to slide 24 for a moment? I wanted to address a question from the audience before we moved on, and that is, can we just talk a little bit, I know you've hit on this a bit, but if you take a look at the states that are on the right-hand side, these are the states that with the Synapse Clean Power Plan compliance, lots of energy efficiency in it, they're actually getting the smallest savings compared to business as usual. Can we talk just a little bit about why don't they see more savings? Is it because the business as usual or the no CPP case isn't that different? Or do you want to attribute it to other reasons?
Sure. So it kind of all harkens back to what are these states doing already. So there are a lot of states out there who have already they've made policy decisions to move towards a clean energy future. And they've put policies in place like energy efficiency standards or renewable portfolio standards or programs like RGGI that require emission reduction caps from the electric sector. And these programs that are in place today already put these states on the right side of the chart. These are the states that are already doing things to achieve savings in a future with or without the Clean Power Plan. Now, what gets interesting here is if you compare the two different scenarios, if you compare the scenario, which is the business as usual future, versus a scenario in which states have to take action to comply with the Clean Power Plan, some states just have to do much more to get there. And if they were to do energy efficiency even without the Clean Power Plan, even in a reference case, they would be achieving savings in that scenario as well.
So let me sum it up and tell me if I've got it right. The states that already have a lot of clean energy policies, they don't have a long ways to go to get to their Clean Power Plan compliance, they're not going to save a whole lot of money from Clean Power Plan compliance, whereas states that need to make some changes, need to put in efficiency policies or what have you in order to achieve Clean Power Plan compliance, those are the states that stand to save the most.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate way to summarize it.
Okay, thanks.
So all the time that we've been talking about these modeled scenarios that go out 15 years to 2030 and talk about what does the future look like for the country in terms of what the electric system, how the electric system shapes up in the far or sort of midterm to far future. But what's really interesting is our analysis of recent data that's come out from the Energy Information Administration that talks about what's been happening in the past couple of years and how the clean energy future is really on its way in a lot of different ways. So here's a chart showing the incremental capacity additions by resource type from 1955 through 2015. And this chart shows the annual capacity that's being added in each one of the years shown here. So this is not cumulative, this is just what happens in that single year. What we see for 2015 is that in the most recent completed year for which we have data, 14 gigawatts of coal retired in that year, and that 15 gigawatts of renewables were added. And that since 2012, more renewable capacity has been added each year, and which is more renewable capacity than any other type of resource. So for sure, the recent trend has definitely been one in which coal is going away and much more towards one where renewables are getting added to the system. But that last chart was about capacity, so potential to create electricity. Here's a chart showing the generation and what the actual terawatt hours were that came out of America's power plants. And what we're seeing here is that coal generation in 2015 is at its lowest level since 1984. In 2015, the level of generation coming from natural gas was just 1% lower than the amount of generation that came from coal. So they're basically equivalent in the most recent year, which means that in 2015, coal and natural gas each represented about 1/3 of total generation, and the rest of the resources took up another third. And you can compare this to a year as recent as 2008, in which coal didn't represent 1/3 of generation, but represented 50%. So coal has come down a lot in just the past couple of years. Finally, here's what it means in terms of electric sector carbon dioxide emissions. Compared to the past couple of years, U.S. electric sector emissions are at their lowest levels since 1995. And basically what this means is that coal has really taken a hit, and coal generation has decreased by a lot. And since coal is the resource with the highest emissions rate compared to all the other ones, it has had sort of an exaggerated impact in terms of the overall emission reductions. So a lot of interesting things happening in the past couple of years, and as 2016 data begins to be released, keep an eye on Synapse, and we'll be talking more about how these trends could really impact the electric sector in the very near future.
Great, thanks, Pat. That was a really helpful presentation, and I'm looking to see some more questions come in on the webinar at synapse-energy.com email site. I'll talk a little bit while we're waiting to see who writes in. So we've got a few more slides up here. One is about resources from Synapse. All of our past webinars on Clean Power Plan and on other issues are up on our website. You can find the slides there as well as audio recordings of them if you want to listen to that. We've done quite a few different reports and fact sheets about Clean Power Plan. Those are up as well, and so too are many other reports from Synapse. All of our work that can be public is posted on the website. I wanted to point out the last couple of slides that Pat showed you there. Those are taken from what's called our Synapse Electricity Snapshot 2016 down at the bottom here. And that's a larger deck of slides, each one looking at some information that came from this new EIA release and putting clean energy in context for the United States. It's a really helpful resource that lets you know the latest information. And Pat had also put together a dynamic image that takes you through the past, what, 15 years? Or?
Since 1990. So
since 1990, so
25.
So,
yeah,
25 years
quite a while.
of U.S. generation by state, and look at how that changed, and that is up there on the website as well as part of that snapshot. So that's all really helpful information that you should check out if you get a chance. I also wanted to mention our new modeling capability that may be of interest to some folks on the phone. We've used this most recently in our couple of reports on the RGGI region and the potential for it to do a deeper emissions reduction than what's currently required. And for that kind of analysis, we do a multi-sector analysis, so not just the electric sector, but looking across all of the energy sectors and the emissions from those different uses of energy, trying to see what are the possibilities for electrification of other sectors, what kind of emissions do they have now or are likely to have in the future, and how it all fits together. So as transportation or heating becomes electrified, we can show what that means for the electric sector in terms of picking up that demand and having to serve it, and figuring out a multi-sector and economy-wide picture of emissions for the United States going forward. And this last slide is just letting people know how to stay connected with us. I am not getting any additional questions in, so I think we're probably going to wrap it up. Do you have anything else you wanted to end with, or?
No, I did. I think we're moving into an interesting couple of months in the future. I think it'll be really fascinating to see what happens come to September, the original date by which states had to submit their Clean Power Plan sort of original plans to the EPA to let the EPA know that they were well on track. And there are some states out there who are very much planning to still do that. So it'll be pretty fascinating to see that combined with the arguments that will be made before the DC Circuit Court in June. And there's a lot of great information, I think, that's going to come out over the next few months just about Clean Power Plan and what it's really going to mean.
Yeah. So thanks, everybody, and please join us in 2 weeks for another webinar. It will be about how we've used our MSEM model to do our RGGI modeling, which gets the 9 RGGI states to a 40% reduction economy-wide in emissions by 2030, and we'll be talking all about that. So hope you can join us then. Thanks so much.